They say the most dangerous person in a boardroom is not the one shouting, but the one quietly taking notes. For 6 months, my terrible boss mistook my strategic silence for submission. He thought stripping away my company vehicle for his secret life was an untraceable crime. But that morning, when our powerful CEO asked one simple question in the main lobby, he handed me a match. I was finally ready to burn his lies to ash. Hello to all our loyal listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. I want to share this with you sincerely. Our channel has unfortunately been demonetized by YouTube, leaving us without the budget to continue operating, which means we must pause uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future and fully transition our operations to Patreon. If you enjoy the story we are bringing you today, please support us by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to exclusive, true stories that are even better, much longer, and more detailed than what we can publish publicly on YouTube, featuring multiple emotional voice actors bringing the drama to life in a single story. You can easily join us by scanning the Patreon QR code right on your screen or by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us dive right into today's story, told directly from the perspective of Chloe Stewart. The Denver air was freezing, slicing straight through my wool coat as I stepped out of the back of a battered, smelling like stale coffee Uber, standing before the towering steel and glass monolith that housed Vertex Horizon Corporation. I took a deep, steadying breath. At 32 years old, I had earned my title as the field audit director through relentless, bone-tiring work. I navigated corporate landmines every single day, but nothing could have prepared me for the trap waiting inside the main lobby. The ground floor of Vertex Horizon was a cathedral of corporate power. It was all polished marble floors, vaulted ceilings, and a terrifying acoustic system that made every footstep or whisper sound like a gavel dropping. It was a cold, calculated space designed specifically to make you feel small. I was walking towards the security turnstiles, head down, when a voice cut through the morning hum. "Chloe?" I stopped dead in my tracks. It was Elias Grant. The chief executive officer of Vertex Horizon was a man whose mere presence could dictate the stock price of our competitors. He was famously sharp, intimidating, and missed absolutely nothing. His tailored suit looked like armor, and his piercing eyes were fixed entirely on me, or rather, on the entrance I had just walked through. "Good morning, Elias," I managed to say, keeping my tone perfectly even and respectful. He did not return the pleasantry. Instead, his brow furrowed, and his voice boomed, carrying across the vast expanse of the lobby and freezing everyone in place. "Why did you arrive in an Uber? Where is the SUV I assigned you for work?" The question hung heavily in the air. Dozens of employees in the vicinity slowed their pace, their ears practically swiveling toward us. A thick, suffocating silence descended upon the space. The vehicle he was referring to was a top-tier company perk, specifically allocated to my position for the extensive field travel my audits required. It was news to me. I had never even seen the keys. I opened my mouth, the pure, unadulterated truth, right on the tip of my tongue. I was about to tell our CEO that I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. But before a single syllable could leave my lips, a heavy, suffocating scent of expensive cologne washed over me. Marcus Sterling, my direct managing director, slid into the space between Elias and me with the smooth, predatory grace of a shark smelling blood in the water. "Elias, good morning," Marcus said, flashing a blinding, perfectly practiced smile. His posture exuded an arrogant, condescending confidence that always made my stomach turn. Marcus did not even look at me. He kept his gaze locked entirely on the CEO, his voice coated in a thick layer of feigned professional concern. "I can answer that for you, Elias. Unfortunately, Chloe suffers from a rather severe case of long-distance driving phobia. It is something we have been working through quietly to ensure she remains comfortable in her vital role. Since the vehicle was sitting unused in the lot, I took the initiative to reallocate the SUV to our partner director who is currently traveling extensively in the neighboring state. It seemed like the most efficient use of company resources." I stood there entirely frozen. The sheer audacity of the lie was so massive, so seamlessly delivered, that for a split second, My brain actually short-circuited. I did not have a driving phobia. I loved driving. I had never once declined the vehicle, nor had Marcus ever offered it to me. The power dynamic in that lobby became a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. If I called Marcus a liar right then and there, in front of the CEO and half the morning shift, it would be my word against the managing director's word. I was the subordinate. Marcus had the political capital. I had nothing but my own sudden indignation. I had no paper trail. I had no hard evidence. I knew that exposing him right now, reacting emotionally and without proof, would only make me look like a hysterical, disgruntled employee throwing her boss under the bus. So, I chose silence. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper. I forced my face into a blank, submissive mask. My silence was the exact confirmation Elias needed to believe the lie. Marcus turned his head just a fraction of an inch, shooting me a covert, razor-sharp look of pure warning. His eyes told me exactly what would happen to my career if I dared to contradict him. He was reveling in my helplessness. "I see," Elias said, adjusting his briefcase, seemingly satisfied with the display of middle management efficiency. "Resource allocation, good initiative, Marcus." "Thank you, Elias. Now, about those third-quarter projections." Marcus smoothly pivoted, effortlessly changing the subject and guiding the CEO toward the executive elevators, leaving me completely behind. I stood entirely alone in the center of that freezing lobby. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the leather straps of my handbag. For 6 solid months, Marcus had been stealing a massive financial benefit rightfully assigned to me. He thought my silence was submission. He thought I was just another weak rung on his corporate ladder to be stepped on and used. As the elevator doors closed on his smug face, a cold, calculated clarity washed over me. I was not going to run to human resources. I was not going to cry. I was going to tear his entire fraudulent career to the ground, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. Barely 15 minutes had passed since the lobby incident, when my desk phone shattered the quiet of my cubicle. The caller ID flashed Marcus Sterling, taking a slow, measured breath. I picked up a notebook and made my way down the carpeted hallway to his sprawling corner office. When I pushed the heavy glass door open, Marcus was leaning back in his ergonomic leather chair, casually tossing a golf ball from hand to hand. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind him offered a panoramic view of the Denver skyline, a stark contrast to my windowless workspace. "Close the door, Chloe, and take a seat," he said, his voice entirely devoid of the sycophantic warmth he had just displayed for our chief executive officer. I did as I was told, perching on the edge of the guest chair. "Let us talk about corporate optics and synergy," Marcus began, dropping the golf ball onto his mahogany desk with a sharp thud. "What happened down there today was a prime example of dynamic problem-solving. The company needs team players, people who understand the bigger picture. You understand the bigger picture, do you not, Chloe?" "I understand," I replied softly, keeping my gaze intentionally fixed on the edge of his desk. "Good, because your annual performance review is coming up in exactly 4 weeks," he continued, leaning forward, steepling his fingers together. "You have been with Vertex Horizon for 3 years now. You are up for a promotion to senior director, which comes with a 20% base salary increase and a rather substantial year-end bonus of $15,000. It would be a terrible shame if a sudden lack of communication skills or a misunderstanding about company resources were to jeopardize that trajectory. We are on the same page regarding your driving phobia, correct?" The gaslighting was masterful. He was not just stealing my vehicle. He was actively threatening my livelihood to ensure my complicity. I was daring me to speak up, knowing he held my entire financial future in his manicured hands. "Yes, Marcus," I said, forcing my voice to tremble just a fraction. "We are on the same page. I appreciate you handling the situation with Elias." A sickeningly triumphant smile spread across his face. He bought the performance completely. He saw exactly what he expected to see: a weak, easily intimidated subordinate who would quietly absorb his abuse to save her paycheck. "Excellent." He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "Get back to your audits." I walked back to my desk, my head bowed. But the moment I slid into my cubicle, the facade dropped entirely. There were no tears of frustration. There was no desperate, panicked draft of an email to human resources. Going to human resources without an airtight case was corporate suicide. I needed a weapon. And thanks to Marcus's arrogance, he had completely forgotten what my actual job title entailed. As the field audit director, my department was responsible for tracking corporate waste and verifying physical assets across all North American branches. Marcus viewed me as a glorified accountant. He completely underestimated the fact that I possessed Level 5 administrative clearance across the entire Vertex Horizon mainframe. I cracked my knuckles, opened my laptop, and launched the secure corporate portal. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard employee dashboard and diving straight into the back-end fleet management database. The screen shifted to a terminal window, lines of data scrolling rapidly as I entered my decryption keys. I ran a query for my own employee identification number. The system instantly returned a match, displaying the 17-character vehicle identification number of the luxury SUV that had been assigned to my compensation package exactly 6 months ago. I copied the vehicle identification number and pasted it into the active asset tracker. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I waited for the loading bar to complete. The screen blinked, pulling up the master ledger for the vehicle. The truth hit me like a physical blow. The SUV had absolutely never been transferred to any partner director. There was no out-of-state reassignment. The vehicle was still officially registered under my department, bleeding thousands of dollars from my specific operating budget. I did not stop there. I needed the geographical proof. I opened a secondary terminal and accessed the vehicle's onboard telematics system. Every company car was equipped with a GPS tracker and a toll transponder for insurance purposes. A digital map of Colorado populated my screen, instantly cluttered with hundreds of overlapping red digital breadcrumbs. I filtered the data parameters to isolate the last 90 days. The results were damning. The SUV had not crossed state lines once. Instead, it was moving continuously within the Denver metropolitan area. I analyzed the timestamps. The vehicle was completely idle in our company parking garage during normal business hours, but every single weekday, exactly at 6 o'clock in the evening, the engine would start. The digital trail showed the heavy SUV navigating through downtown traffic, spending hours driving across the city every night, and remaining constantly active throughout the entire weekend. I zoomed in on the most frequent parking location, a cluster of GPS pings so dense it formed a solid red circle on the map. I cross-referenced the longitudinal and latitudinal coordinates with the public county property registry. The address belonged to a sprawling, multi-million-dollar residential property in the exclusive Cherry Creek neighborhood. It was Marcus Sterling's private residence. My pulse raced as the puzzle pieces snapped into a devastatingly clear picture. I quickly pivoted to the corporate expense database, pulling up the fuel card associated with that specific vehicle. The charges were astronomical, $300 here, $450 there, completely draining the departmental travel budget. Every single receipt was digitally approved by Marcus himself, fraudulently categorized under the accounting code for client entertainment and field operations. I was not just driving it home, he was using it as a heavy-duty workhorse for something massive, all on the company's dime, while holding my career hostage to cover his tracks. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and retrieved a heavy, black, 2-terabyte encrypted solid-state drive. I plugged it into my workstation and began a massive data extraction. I systematically downloaded the raw GPS telemetry, the toll transponder logs, the falsified expense reports, and the time-stamped engine diagnostics. I watched the progress bar inch toward 100%, securing every single megabyte of data behind a heavily encrypted, 48-character password. Marcus thought he was playing a brilliant game of checkers, dominating the board with simple, aggressive moves. But as I safely ejected the hard drive and slipped it into the hidden lining of my purse, I knew I was setting up a grandmaster game of chess, and he had just handed me his queen. Exactly 3 weeks later, the atmosphere in the executive boardroom on the top floor was suffocatingly tense. heavy with the scent of dark roast coffee and unchecked corporate ambition. It was the quarterly operational expenditure review, an arena where department heads fought to justify their budgets before the watchful eyes of the entire senior management team. At the head of the massive mahogany table sat Elias Grant, his pen poised over a leather-bound notepad, silently judging every syllable spoken in the room. Marcus Sterling took the floor with the swagger of a man who believed he had already won the war. He smoothed the lapels of his custom-tailored suit, clicked his wireless presenter, and threw his first slide up on the 80-inch monitor. The title read, Dynamic Resource Optimization, in a bold, aggressive font. He spent the next 20 minutes pacing around the screen, throwing out empty corporate buzzwords with sickening enthusiasm. He was putting on an absolute masterclass in self-aggrandizement, painting himself as the sole savior of the company's bottom line. By streamlining our logistical assets and eliminating redundant overhead, Marcus announced, his voice echoing off the soundproofed walls. My division has successfully achieved a staggering 15% reduction in operational costs this quarter. We are not just meeting our financial targets, we are completely redefining them. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Several vice presidents nodded along. Completely captivated by the illusion he was projecting, Marcus soaked in the validation, puffing his chest out. But he could not just leave it there. His ego demanded absolute submission, and he needed to secure his lie in front of the largest audience possible. He turned his gaze down the length of the table, locking eyes with me. A predatory, sickly sweet smile stretched across his face. However, I cannot take all the credit, Marcus continued, gesturing expansively in my direction. True optimization requires teamwork and personal sacrifice. I want to publicly recognize our field audit director, Chloe Stewart. When a visiting executive partner urgently needed long-term transportation, Chloe graciously volunteered to surrender her assigned corporate vehicle. She has been taking ride shares for months, putting the needs of the collective Vertex Horizon family far above her own comfort. That is the kind of leadership we should all strive to emulate. Right on cue. Polite applause broke out around the table. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, filled with fabricated corporate admiration. It was a brilliantly twisted psychological trap. By publicly praising me for a sacrifice I never made, Marcus was effectively welding my mouth shut. If I denied it now, I would destroy the beautiful narrative he just fed the board, making myself look bitter and wildly unprofessional. He was using praise as a weapon, cementing his lie into the official company record. I waited for me to squirm, to show a flicker of anger or panic. Instead, I simply sat back in my leather chair. I offered him a warm, perfectly manufactured smile, and gave a slow, gracious nod of acknowledgement. Thank you, Marcus. I am always happy to do what is best for the company, I said, my voice completely smooth and devoid of any sarcasm. My sheer, unbothered endurance acted like a shot of adrenaline straight to his ego. He practically glowed, turning back to the screen, firmly believing he was an untouchable king ruling over a kingdom of fools. But from the head of the table, Elias Grant was not clapping. The chief executive officer slowly lowered his pen. His sharp gaze shifted from Marcus's booming presentation and settled entirely on me. He lingered there for 5, maybe 6 agonizingly long seconds, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied my overly serene expression. He was a predator who recognized when the jungle was entirely too quiet. While Marcus rambled on about fiscal synergy, I casually lowered my gaze to my open laptop screen, gulped safely away from the executives beside me. Under the guise of taking meeting notes, I had launched a highly encrypted terminal window running a live feed of the fleet telematics software. My fingers rested lightly on the keyboard as I watched a small, pulsing red dot on the digital map of Denver. The board meeting was happening right in the middle of a Tuesday morning, yet, according to the live satellite feed, my company-issued luxury vehicle was currently speeding down Interstate 25, miles away from any corporate office. The trap was set, the audience was seated, and the main event was finally hurtling right toward us. The agenda seamlessly transitioned to the compliance and documentation audit phase. Marcus confidently projected a digitized transfer of liability form onto the 80-inch screen at the front of the room. It was supposed to be the airtight, undeniable proof of his brilliant resource reallocation. The document detailed the supposed transfer of the luxury vehicle to the out-of-state director. My eyes tracked across the high-resolution scan, skimming past the boilerplate legal jargon until they locked onto the bottom right corner. There it was, my signature, or rather, a painfully clumsy, amateurish attempt at it. The ink stroke hesitated, trembling slightly at the tail end of the letter in my last name. Anyone who had ever worked closely with me, anyone who had ever seen my audit approvals, knew exactly how I signed legal documents. I always executed a rapid, violent slash of the pen, finishing with a heavy, unbroken underline that nearly tore the paper. This signature glowing on the screen was a slow, deliberate tracing. It lacked any of the kinetic energy of my actual handwriting. He had actually forged my consent on a binding corporate document. The sheer arrogance of the act was almost intoxicating. By trying to cover his tracks, Marcus had just handed me a federal crime on a silver corporate platter. While Marcus continued to drone on about compliance synergy and optimized routing protocols, I subtly shifted my focus. I minimized the fleet tracking window on my laptop, moving with practiced precision. I opened a secure, heavily encrypted messaging proxy on a secondary browser tab. My target for this message was not located inside our building. The recipient was exactly 3 miles away, stationed at the regional headquarters of Apex Dynamics, Vertex Horizon's most vicious and well-funded industry rival. I quickly typed out a brief, highly specific anonymous tip addressed directly to the Apex Dynamics head of building security. I detailed that a suspicious, unregistered corporate vehicle belonging to a rival technology firm was currently breaching their underground loading dock protocols. I heavily implied that the occupants might be engaging in corporate espionage, trying to infiltrate their highly sensitive annual client appreciation gala happening that very afternoon. I hit send, routing the message through a labyrinth of proxy servers, leaving absolutely zero digital fingerprints behind. With the first domino tipped, I toggled back to the master telematics suite. The pulsing red dot on the digital map of the city had finally stopped moving. It was time for the final piece of the puzzle. I initiated a remote administrative command that Marcus had absolutely no idea even existed within our network architecture. I silently activated the high-definition, two-way dashcam mounted directly behind the rearview mirror of the stolen vehicle, intentionally bypassing the local red indicator light in the cabin. The live video feed buffered for just a fraction of a second before flooding my screen with crisp, full-color reality. The camera was pointing outward, framing the unmistakable concrete pillars of the underground VIP loading bay at the Apex Dynamics Tower. But it was the interior cabin view that revealed the breathtaking depth of Marcus's parasitic greed. The pristine, cream-colored leather seats of the luxury company vehicle had been completely folded flat. The entire back cabin was stuffed to the roof with heavy, stainless steel catering warmers, towering tiers of expensive floral arrangements, and massive insulated coolers. The premium corporate vehicle had been hollowed out and shamelessly repurposed into a high-end delivery truck. A woman stepped into the frame of the camera, wiping sweat from her forehead as she reached into the trunk. I recognized her instantly from the silver-framed photograph sitting proudly on Marcus's office desk. It was his wife. She was wearing a branded apron displaying the logo of her private, boutique wedding and event planning business. She was hauling heavy trays of artisanal appetizers out of our company car, frantically preparing to serve them to the executive board and top-tier clients of our biggest corporate enemy. Marcus was not just stealing company gas for a long commute. He was using hundreds of thousands of dollars of our corporate assets to illegally subsidize his wife's private business operations, and to add the ultimate, poetic insult to his monumental fraud, they were actively servicing Vertex Horizon's most aggressive competitor, entirely on our dime, during prime company hours. The trap was no longer just set. The steel jaws were practically vibrating with tension. I watched through the live feed as 2 heavily armed security guards from Apex Dynamics stepped into the frame, their walkie-talkies raised. acting exactly on the anonymous security tip I had just provided. The timing was nothing short of absolute perfection. I took a slow, deep breath, letting an icy, calculated calm wash over my entire nervous system. I gently lowered the screen of my laptop until it was open only a fraction of an inch, just enough to keep the live stream running in the background. I folded my hands neatly on the polished mahogany table and lifted my chin. I looked directly at Marcus, who was just wrapping up his fraudulent masterpiece of a presentation, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire world was about to end. I was finally ready to pull the pin on the grenade. Marcus was literally taking a victory lap around the massive mahogany table. He clicked his presentation remote, bringing up his final slide, a massive, brilliantly colored bar chart showcasing his completely fabricated cost reductions. He was preparing to deliver his closing statement, and the entire room was eating out of the palm of his hand. Just as he drew a deep, theatrical breath to deliver his final, self-aggrandizing sentence, I gently raised my right hand into the air. The movement was slight, almost timid. I made absolutely sure my posture and facial expression reflected complete deference. "Excuse me, Marcus?" I spoke up, my voice soft, laced with exactly the right amount of innocent, wide-eyed concern. "I am so incredibly sorry to interrupt your flow. I just had a very quick question regarding the resource reallocation you mentioned earlier." Marcus paused in his tracks. His perfectly practiced, blinding smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping rigidly back into place. He clearly did not appreciate going off script, especially not in front of Elias Grant. But since he had just spent 5 solid minutes publicly praising my ultimate team player attitude, he could not shut me down now without looking like a massive hypocrite. "Of course, Chloe," he said, his tone dripping with a heavy, condescending patience. "What is on your mind? We always value total transparency here." "Well," I began, shifting my gaze nervously around the room, playing the part of the anxious, caring subordinate to absolute perfection. "I was just thinking about the visiting executive partner who is currently using my assigned vehicle. Is he doing all right? I was watching the morning news in the lobby, and they said there is a massive, record-breaking blizzard sweeping through that neighboring state right now. I just wanted to make sure company property and our partner are completely safe." I watched the gears grind behind his eyes. Marcus had a clear choice in that exact moment. He could have deflected. He could have said he would check on the situation later. But his ego was entirely too bloated. He needed to prove to the board of directors, and specifically to our chief executive officer, that he was in absolute microscopic control of every single moving part within his division. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, his smile widening into a smug, victorious grin. He was about to weave a brand new, highly detailed lie right on the spot. "That is incredibly thoughtful of you to ask, Chloe," Marcus lied, his voice as smooth as glass. "But there is absolutely no need to worry. His schedule changed at the very last minute. He actually drove back early this morning to avoid the storm system entirely. He is currently sitting in a highly sensitive meeting right here in the Denver Financial District as we speak. The vehicle is safely parked in the secured underground garage of the banking tower." It was the final nail. He had just hammered it directly into his own coffin in front of the entire senior management team. At the head of the table, Elias Grant shifted his weight in his heavy leather chair. The chief executive officer's thick eyebrows crashed together into a deep, severe frown. Elias was a man who remembered every single detail of every executive schedule. A visiting partner being in the Denver Financial District without his prior knowledge was a glaring, unacceptable anomaly. I did not wait for Elias to ask the inevitable question. I bypassed Marcus entirely. I turned my body and locked my eyes directly with the most powerful man in the room. I dropped the timid, innocent facade instantly. My voice turned cold, clear, and perfectly steady, cutting through the warm air of the executive boardroom like a surgical scalpel. "Sir," I addressed Elias directly, my words echoing sharply in the sudden quiet. "I believe our corporate navigation and security mainframe has been severely compromised by outside hackers, or alternatively, Marcus is entirely mistaken about the location and usage of our corporate assets. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees in a single second. The polite, collaborative atmosphere vanished in a heartbeat, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. It was the kind of oppressive quiet that precedes a catastrophic physical event. The vice president of finance stopped tapping his pen. The head of human resources froze completely with her coffee cup suspended halfway to her mouth. Every single set of eyes darted between my stoic face, Marcus's suddenly pale complexion, and the grim, unreadable expression of Elias Grant. Marcus's face contorted, a flash of genuine panic finally breaking through his arrogant mask. He took a rapid step toward me, his voice dropping an octave, desperately trying to project authority while masking his rising terror. "Chloe, I am going to have to ask you to step outside," Marcus commanded, his tone highly aggressive and defensive. "You are completely out of line. This is a quarterly budget review, not a forum for baseless technical paranoia." I ignored him entirely. My hands were already moving swiftly across the keyboard. With deliberate precision, I pushed my laptop screen all the way open. I reached across the polished wood of the table and grabbed the main display cable. The sharp, metallic click of the connector sliding into the port of my computer echoed like a gunshot in the dead silent room. I hit the source toggle key on my keyboard. The massive 80-inch monitor at the front of the room flickered. Marcus's beautiful fabricated bar chart vanished into digital blackness. In its place, the giant screen illuminated with the stark, utilitarian interface of the Level 5 Master Fleet Management System, a highly restricted administrative dashboard that Marcus had absolutely no idea I possessed the clearance to access. The massive 80-inch screen illuminated the darkened boardroom. I had configured the display to show a dual feed. On the left side of the monitor was a high-resolution satellite map of the greater Denver area. A large, pulsing red icon marked the exact, real-time location of the missing luxury vehicle. On the right side of the monitor, a crystal-clear, high-definition live video stream from the hidden dashcam played out in real time. The vice president of operations leaned forward, squinting at the map coordinates. "That is not the downtown financial district," he muttered, his voice thick with confusion. "That is the corporate campus of Apex Dynamics. What is our vehicle doing at the headquarters of our biggest rival?" "I think the video feed will answer that question," I replied, my voice eerily calm. Every head in the room swiveled toward the right side of the screen. The dashcam was pointed outward from the cabin, but the reflection on the polished glass doors of the Apex Dynamics loading dock provided a perfect mirror image of what was happening behind the vehicle. The pristine leather seats of the $80,000 company car were completely flattened. A woman stepped into the frame. She was wearing a black apron embroidered with the logo of a private catering company. She was aggressively hauling massive aluminum chafing dishes and towering stacks of hors d'oeuvres out of the back of our corporate asset. "Is that?" the head of human resources began, her eyes wide with shock. "Is that your wife, Marcus?" Marcus did not answer. He could not answer. The arrogant, condescending managing director who had swaggered into this room 30 minutes ago was completely gone. In his place stood a broken, terrified man. All the blood had entirely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent white. A thick bead of cold sweat rolled down his temple. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, pathetic wheezing sound came out. But the show was not over. Right as the board watched in horrified fascination, the video feed captured 3 men in dark tactical uniforms storming into the loading bay. They were the private security detail for Apex Dynamics. They surrounded the vehicle instantly, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. Through the audio feed of the dashcam, a sharp, authoritative voice echoed into our silent boardroom. "Step away from the vehicle immediately. We have received a credible security alert regarding corporate espionage and unauthorized access to our client Gala." Marcus's wife dropped a tray of expensive appetizers right onto the concrete floor. The silver platter clattered loudly. A second later, the flashing red and blue lights of 2 Denver police cruisers reflected off the concrete walls of the loading dock, painting the entire video feed in a frantic, pulsating glow. The trap had snapped shut with absolute, devastating precision. The silence in our boardroom was absolute. Nobody breathed. Then, the explosion came. Elias Grant raised his large hand and slammed it down onto the solid mahogany table with the force of a thunderclap. The coffee cups rattled violently in their saucers. The chief executive officer slowly stood up. He did not yell. He did not need to. His voice was a lethal, quiet growl that promised absolute destruction. "Marcus," Elias said, every syllable dripping with venom, "you have exactly 5 seconds to get out of my sight and walk directly to the legal department. You are going to explain to them why my corporate property is currently being impounded by our fiercest competitor during a police raid." Marcus swallowed hard. His knees physically buckled, and he had to grab the back of his expensive leather chair just to stay standing. "Elias, please, I can explain," he stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "It is a misunderstanding. The budget, the synergy." "Get out!" Elias roared, the sudden volume making half the executives flinch in their seats. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet, and practically ran out of the boardroom. The fallout was swift and merciless. Marcus was officially terminated with absolute cause exactly 3 hours later. He did not even get the dignity of packing his own desk. 2 burly security guards escorted him out of the lobby through the front doors, right past the very spot where he had so confidently lied to the CEO just weeks prior. Furthermore, the Vertex Horizon legal team immediately filed a massive civil lawsuit against him. He was facing charges for severe financial fraud, the blatant forgery of my signature on official corporate documents, and the gross misappropriation of company assets. His career was completely incinerated, reduced to a pile of toxic ash. Late that afternoon, I was summoned down to the fleet management office. The manager, looking incredibly apologetic, handed me a sleek, heavy set of key fobs. I walked down to the executive parking garage. The vehicle had been retrieved, fully detailed, and smelled perfectly of fresh, untouched leather. I opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and gripped the steering wheel. I let out a long, slow breath, finally shedding the heavy, suffocating layer of passive endurance I had worn for the last 6 months. I adjusted the rear-view mirror and looked at my own reflection. A genuine, bright smile spread across my face. I realized then that the absolute highest class of revenge is never found in screaming, throwing a tantrum, or loudly demanding justice. The greatest revenge is simply maintaining your composure, smiling politely, and silently handing your enemy a long, sturdy rope, knowing full well they will use it to hang themselves. Thank you so much to all of our amazing listeners for tuning into this story today. We would love to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? Please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story satisfying and thrilling, please remember that this channel will unfortunately not be uploading new videos here on YouTube in the coming future. We are transitioning our entire operation over to Patreon. Please help us keep these stories alive by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to the absolute best, exclusive true revenge stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or by using the link provided in the description box and the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your incredible support.